Welcome to another edition of the Sim Racing Garage. I'm Barry Rowland, and as you can probably already tell, we'll be doing a review that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, the D-Box Motion System Review. If you've been following my channel, you know that I've been using a Sim Experience Stage 4 rig for a few years now, and it has served me well. But ever since I had the opportunity to try a D-Box motion simulator, I've always wanted to have one of my own. And, of course, I'll be employing the in-depth Sim Racing Garage review process along the way. So let's get to it. So now let's take a closer look at what we actually get in a D-Box 4 actuator kit. Now this particular kit is a 4400i, and the 4 in the 4400 stands for 4 actuators. If you got a 3400, it would be 3 actuators, so forth and so on. And if you had a 4250, then that would be 4 actuators and rated at 250 pounds. This is a 4400, so these actuators are actually rated at 400 pounds each. The cables are really nicely done. Everything is very professional looking. Nice cable gables everywhere. Nice thick cables that look like they've got a lot of shielding on them. And they're still flexible enough, it seems, to make the bends we're going to have to make as far as when we set this up and manage our cable runs. The actual boxes themselves are all aluminum units. Very nice. Got to have a brushed finish to them. And really, there's not a whole lot to say as far as we'll get a little bit further in detail on the controller boxes and the actuators later on. But we just, like I said, this is just an overview of what you get. You get a couple of power cables, and I'm not sure about looking at these coiled up if there's going to be long enough for my application, but we'll see once we get there. We also get some of these feet or cup feet, and I'll give you a closer look at it over here. And this is a nice polished anodized unit. It's very, very slick inside, very smooth. And what that's going to do is the actuator foot is actually going to sit in there. And this is like a plastic type of foot or puck in here that actually moves around. It's very flexible. It spins and it will actually go back and forth a little bit. So that's going to sit in there like that and let the actuator be able to move a little bit at angle too as things are lifting on the other side, and the actuators are just doing their job. Right. So, and these are pretty heavy actually. So we get 4 of those. We also get some mounting brackets, and there's 2 different styles. Here's one, and I'll show you a closer look over here. And this is a single mount, so that means there's 2 mounting holes on the actuator on each side of the actuator, so that's 4 total. But this bracket here will only mount to one side of the actuator, and then it has a flange up here, obviously, where we could mount on top of, say, a 40 profile or a profile type rig, which really just having 2 bolts in there and just 2 bolts in the actuator, I'm not sure that I'd be real comfortable with that. And there's other solutions that we can use, and I'll show you that right here. This is a U-bracket, which actually has holes on both sides of it. Get a closer look. And we have, now we're going to have 4 bolts mounting this to the actual actuator. And then we have 4 holes on the back that we can actually mount to the profile. A much more confidence-inspiring mount, in my opinion. And these actually won't, out of the box, fit 40 series profile, so we're going to have to make some modifications, but we'll get to that part later on. So we're going to use these. And obviously they're just going to go on like this. So what else we get? Well, we get some bolts that are actually going to attach our brackets to our actuators. We get some Ethernet cable, and when I first saw the Ethernet cable, I thought maybe there was some kind of a network connection I needed to have. But apparently, the boxes have these RJ45 connectors on them. I'll show you over here closer. So we have 2 of them. And how this works is we're going to connect both boxes together with 1 cable. And then the longer cable, we're going to use that to run it over to where our computer is. Once we've done that, we have this little puppy. And this is a KPA-1P interface. That's what they call it anyway. I'll give you a closer look over here. It is, and you can see through this semi-transparent plastic, it's just a PCB board in there that's performing a conversion from the RJ45 to a USB mini plug over here. And they give you a little cable here for making that connection. And it's also, if you read the instructions, it says that it's actually, their overview of this is it's interpreting the telemetry from the game you're running and then sending it to the controller modules inside the boxes, the motor controllers, and telling them what to do basically. So it's got some firmware programmed in there, and I would imagine that it's also acting as a dongle where you have to have this obviously or your system's not going to work. So unless you have one of these dongles from D-Box, your system will not work. Right. Anything else we want to go over? Well, that's pretty much it. This is pretty much a self-contained plug and play, if you will, as much as it could be for this system. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and look at the actuators and the controller boxes and get a little closer look and in-depth view of those pieces. Right, so now we can actually take a closer look at our actuators that I've already seemed to have scratched a little bit. But anodized aluminum or anodized anything will do that to you. Anyway, these are rather heavy units. They are 6.7 pounds or 3 kilograms in weight, which is pretty stout actually. I was a little surprised at the heft of these actuators when I first picked one up. I said, oh my goodness. I'm familiar with SCN actuators and they don't weigh like these do. So, and it's got the usual caution stickers on it for excessive heat, so this motor may get warm when we're using it, but I'll actually test that when I'm using it once it's installed. Of course, it's got a lot of stickers on them. Let's see if I can get this over here without trashing anything. And here is the specs on this as far as the servo motor that's running the actuator. This is what they call a non-captive setup. So that means it's just going to sit down here on the floor in its little disc and it won't be bolted to anything. Now, speaking of the disc, these little feet here, you can see they actually pivot sideways. And they also turn around, they spin. That gives this actuator freedom to do what it's supposed to do without binding up. So if one side of your rig goes down and this other side comes up, it can actually lean a little bit as that happens because of this roundish finish on the foot. What else can we look at here? This is a dust cover, if you will, for the breathing hole for the actuator. It's actually, it looks like just a piece of tape, but I looked at it under a microscope. It actually had a real fine metal-like chain link mesh on it. So it lets the, again, actuator breathe, but keeps all the dust out. Anything else on here? We'll get the D-Box, official D-Box serial number and part number here. And we've got several different serial numbers on this. And I imagine that's for the encoder, the servo, and then whatever parts are actually in the bottom part of the leg here. And it's got a high pot tested sticker on it, whatever that means. So these things are, again, 400 pounds of lift because they're the 400i models. The 250i models have 250 pounds of lift, so that's how they designate their capacities. And also, this actuator will move 100 millimeters per second under load. So I'm not sure, I haven't been able to find out exactly what under load means or how much of a load it really is, but under load. We'll just have to let it go with that. So 100 milliseconds, that's rather 100 millimeters per second, and that's 1.5 inches of lift, so it'll go up and down 1.5 inches or 34.5 millimeters. So obviously 1.5 inches, 100 millimeters is 4 inches basically, just shy of 4 inches. So we're only got a capability or travel range on this of 1.5 inches. So probably more like 0.3 seconds for it to go its full extension. So it's pretty fast, and it should be plenty fast for simulating a race car. But we'll see, won't we? Right, so anything else I can talk about here? Let's see, they're 341 millimeters long in length. The widest point here is actually 58 millimeters. And you can see here that we've got our threaded holes for mounting. We got 2 on this side, and we've also got 2 on the other side, and it's going to fit in our U bracket when we actually get to the mounting part of it. Now these threads, actually I thought these threads would be metric, but it actually calls for a 1/4 inch 20 pitch thread screw, which is very similar to screws that we use in like a 15 series or a 10 series profile. Curious, I thought for sure that would be a millimeter. Right. Anything else we can talk about here? Yeah, I guess that's it. Got nice cable gables on them. And we have some very nice cable here, and I think I've already said that once. It looks very resistant to scuffing and scraping, and you can get a pretty good bend on this, it looks like. So I've seen some installations where the cables were actually looped like that pretty tightly without kinking the cables that are inside. And we'll see what the cables look like inside when we get to the controller box part of the review. So 2 for each box, and that's really all there is to look at when it comes to these actuators. I'm not going to pull one apart. Would hate to void the warranty and something happen from a system that I just got. At least I'm going to run it a little bit before I ever venture into taking one apart, I think. Right, so what we'll do next is go ahead and take the access cover off the controller box and have a look inside and see what's going on with that. All right, now we can take a closer look at this controller box and see what's inside. They have this little access door or access cover that I was able to take off. Very nice. It doesn't void the warranty. But if you take off these off the bottom, then you can see these stickers here say D-Box, warranty void if this seal is broken. So I decided not to go any further into the box. Because of the cost of these systems, it just doesn't make any sense to void the warranty right off the box, or right at the start of getting one. So just some stickers on here. Is really not much to show you. The serial numbers, everything looks like it's barcoded, so they can just scan these things. On the front, this was a little bit surprised me. I don't know if it surprised me, but it was kind of peculiar when I first saw this. Was that each one of these controller boxes, actually, obviously this got 2 actuators, but the actuators are for one side or the other of the platform you're mounting it to. You can see the sticker on here indicates this black dot being this particular one is the rear right actuator. And then over here, you can see this sticker is showing us it's the front right actuator. So that means the other box obviously is going to be the left side. I thought, when I first thought, intuitively to me, it would have been, you know, both of them 2 in the back and then 2 in the front, and they controlled it that way. But I imagine the way their software works is probably one of the reasons why they do it that way. No big deal, really. So now that we've got the access, and not like I said, not much to see here on an aluminum box. Very nicely done, though. All nice high industrial grade connectors everywhere at these cable gables. Very nice stuff. And it's not going to be easy to show you too far back in here, as you can see that with this cover on, but there's not much to see back here. We have on the back the connectors for our RJ45s here, and of course we have the mains connector over here. Now I can look in there and see the mains connector, but I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see it, but it's got some really nice shielding on it back here, which is a nice thing to have. And I don't know if you guys can see it way back there. I'm just holding it so maybe you can. But we want all the shielding we can get to try to keep the electronics from being affected from any EMI. Now also, which is a nice little surprise when I open this up, let's see if you guys can see this, is this has actually a user serviceable fuse in here. Instead of soldering it to their PCB board in here, they actually have it to where you can replace it. Very nice, and I guess that's one of the access doors here. And another thing, of course, we can see the cables coming in. And we have 3 cables over here that are actually, looks like they're going to the power connector. Then we have the data cables coming out. Oh, just broke my pointer. We got the data cables coming out here and plugging into the board. So you have the same thing duplicated over here. Well, what's peculiar though here and worth noting is that there's actually another data terminal here. You see this plug? Doesn't have anything in it, and it looks like we have another power plug back here also. So with the Gen 2 boxes, I believe there's a facility for a 3rd actuator, maybe for a yaw type of actuator, maybe for traction loss control or something like that, but who knows. But there's a rumor that they're going to be supporting another actuator. So Looking further in here, you can see that we have two big metal pieces in here, and those aren't really supports. Well, they could be supports too, I suppose, but they're acting as heat sinks for these motor controller integrated chips that are in here. Now, these integrated chips are made by International Rectifier, and they're called IRAMs 10UP60As. Now, the 10 means it's a 10 amp motor controller, and the 60 stands for 600 volts. So that's what they'll take. And we also see we have these huge, it's hard for you to see because of the wires in here, but we've got some very large capacitors in here. And they're Nichicon, which actually makes some high-grade audio capacitors too, even though these are not the models that are the high-grade audios. And they're actually 400 volt, 470 microfarad units. So that's part of the filtering system, I'm pretty sure. Not much else to look here. We do have a little bit of some jumpers over here. So that's to do with configuration. So you might have to go in there and change that one day if they tell you to do something different. Or maybe if we add an actuator, we'll do something different over there. But other than that, and also these two chips you see in here, they're actually, these pieces of aluminum look like to me that they're acting as heat sinks also, because it looks like there's some kind of a thermal paste in between them and these metal plates. And if you look down there, not only do we got these empty plugs, but we've also got another one of those IRAMs chips or motor controllers that doesn't have a heat sink attached to it. So again, very curious. Not much else to see. Again, at least they did give us an access door so we could take a look at it and see what was going on. And now what we'll do is, well, there's not a whole lot left to do as far as close-up showing you guys what this stuff looks like. And what we'll do next is, really, it's time to mount this thing up and get it rolling. And what will go next is the brackets. I'm going to have to modify the brackets to fit my 40 series profile that I'm using on this SimLabs P1 rig that I'm going to actually attach this all to. And we'll also talk about how I'm going to attach the boxes to the rig so they don't get sloshed around everywhere. And we'll just get to the brackets first, though, and see how they work on the actuators and what I have to do to make them fit. So this is the bracket. Obviously, we've seen this before on the parts included with the D-box system. And of course, those are our holes for mounting on the side of the actuators, and each actuator has a pair of these holes or a set of these holes on each side of it. This is the part that we're going to have to modify because these holes do not line up with 40 series profile, which I'm using on my rig. If you look at it here, I'll center this hole on the bottom channel there, and you can see the top hole over here is not centered on that channel. So obviously that's not going to work. So what we're going to have to do is drill our own holes. And this also gives me an opportunity to drill a bigger hole. These are 6mm holes made for 6mm bolts. And I want to put 8mm bolts in mine. So since I have to drill the holes anyway, I'm going to go ahead and make them 8mm. Now, I could just go ahead and use these two holes on either side and just mount it, but with only 2 bolts on each side, because obviously this one's not going to line up, this side won't. But I'd rather have 4 bolts in there because, well, D-box gives you a bracket that requires 4 holes, so I imagine 4 holes is the way to go instead of just putting 2 in there. I want to make sure that these 400 series, or even if I was using a 250 series actuator from D-box, I want to make sure that these holes are where they need to be and everything is bolted up nice and tight and secure, so we don't put any undue stress on the actuator by any kind of movement of the bracket against the profile when the actuators are actually working. So first I wanted to verify that this is 40mm, and I already did that. So the centers on these channels, you can see from here, are 40mm, and this is industry standard 40mm profile, so that makes sense. Looks like everything looks good there. And I use these calipers because once I lock it down with my screw here, then I can transfer that pattern over here to the back of the plate, or the bracket rather, and drill my 8mm holes. Now it's crucial that I get this spacing correct. The horizontal, in the way we're looking at it here, the horizontal spacing has to be correct. Now the vertical spacing is not as sensitive because I can have them closer or further away apart and it's not going to matter. The bracket's still going to fit in there. And I kind of want to get them centered on the bracket also, just for even weight distribution. But that's going to give me a reveal on the bottom down here. but I have feet on my rig that are like 2.5 inches deep, so really that's not a big issue. But it is something to make note of when we're looking at it. So all we have to do now is go over to the bench. I'm going to put some marks as close as I can to the sides, and remember, these are going to be bigger holes than these by 2 mils, so I have to be mindful of that when I'm marking these holes, because I don't want the holes to get too close to the existing holes and degrade the integrity of this mount. So I might bring them in a little bit on each side just so I can keep a good distance, or as much distance as I can, being practical, so I don't get too close to these holes. So that's what we'll do next. So here we are marking where we want the holes to go, and I'm just using a safety pin here as kind of a scroll to get the mark I want, and we have a nice X there. So now all we need is 3 more of these, and it's over to the drill press. As you can see here, we're working on a bracket that already has 3 holes in it, and I'm finishing up the 4th hole here. And all I have to do is do this to 3 more brackets, and then I'll have the holes that I want to make this work. So when we get back, we'll take a look at the finished brackets. So now we've completed drilling all the holes in the brackets that I need, and I've actually taken one of the brackets and mounted it to one of the actuators, just to show you how this is going on. And again, we've got 2 on each side of the bracket, very secure. And also wanted to show you that we can actually mount this at different heights, and I'm not sure this is the height I'm going for. I just put it on that way. I'm not sure as far as where this is going to need clearance when it's sitting up on my rig. I might actually have it all the way down in this hole here to actually lower the actuator as in comparison to the side of the rig. Well, that's one of those things you really don't know until you start putting it on. And at least we have 2 other positions in height that we can use. And I'll put it on here too. Make sure these things don't move around on me. You can see the gap now that I'm going to have when I have these brackets on between this housing and the actual back of the bracket here. So that gives me a measurement for the head size, or how thick of a head I can have on the bolts going to the profile T-nuts. So I just want to mock that up also while I was doing this. Right, so one more thing is I'm going to be moving these actuators around, and just to try to find the sweet spot. The left and right positions are going to be the same as far as crosswise, but as far as moving the fronts and the rears back and forth, I'm going to be playing with that a little bit and try to find a sweet spot, at least what I would think is a sweet spot for me, and trying to replicate what I should be feeling in a race car when I'm driving it. So I'll be moving things around. So I didn't want the back of this bracket to be scratching up that black profile that I have on this SimLabs P1 chassis, and it would, I guarantee it will. But I had these spacers laying around. I decided to go ahead and use these, and they have kind of a 2-side thing there. One's kind of a flat and shiny slick, and the other one is, well, the front part. And I just drilled some pattern holes in it that match the holes back here. So now when I mount these brackets, before I put the actuators in them, I'll just have these on the back. And now these will slide against the 80/20 profile and have the least chance of scratching that anodization off of the profile as I'm trying to find that sweet spot. Just something I had laying around, and I was thinking about how I was going to try to keep these brackets from scratching everything up when I moved them around, and actually these really came out and did a good job for me. And they're breakaways too, so I could actually break the ends off of these if I wanted to, just snap them off, but I might just leave them there. Right, so there it is. We have the brackets. We're ready to mount our actuators, but before I actually mount the actuator, I need to mount these control boxes. And when I come back next, what we'll talk about is how I'm going to mount these control boxes to the SimLabs P1 chassis. Alright, so we'll do a quick overview of what I'm going to do to mount these controller boxes. I have some 10 series profile that I had laying around, and I cut these on the chop saw to about 498 millimeters, even though the spacing between the chassis on the wide part, as far as measuring it from the width, not the length, is 500 millimeters. But I wanted a little bit of play room as I lowered it down to secure it inside of the chassis so it didn't scratch everything up. So simple enough to cut these on the chop saw with a non-ferrous metal blade. I think if you guys have seen some other videos, you know how I do that. It's real easy. And I'm going to be using these brackets because we're going to 10 series to a 40 series. I'm going to need to have this 8mm bolt going to the 40 series, and then I'll have this 1/4 inch 20 pitch bolt going actually to the 10 itself. And this is a cool little bracket they sell just for that. It's got the big hole for the 8mm there for the 40 series, and then the smaller one for the 10 series. So we'll set those brackets up, and as you can see over here, I've already got one mocked up. And be careful, move this around. These actuators like to slide around on you. So this is what it's going to look like. And now I have the capability of, because we're going to have 8mm bolts and T-nuts in the channels, to locate this at will to where I want it to be. And just loosen up the screws here on both sides of the box that are going to the 10 series profile, and we can slide it this way at will. So we can find the exact location we need without any hassle, really, once we have it in there and bolted up. And this is actually going to be hanging below the profile side on the chassis. But that's okay because the chassis is going to be up in the air anyway. Because I'm going to mount this on the very lower channel, the lowest channel on that profile, because I want it to be as low in the chassis as possible. Low center of gravity, see, it gives you a better controlling car. So that's the solution I'm going to use. It seems to be pretty easy to do, and you know, there's other ways to do this obviously, but I thought this would be the best way to go for adjustability in the future, because I want to make sure all this stuff is adjustable, because typically when you get this stuff planned out and you put it together and you get everything in, you got to go, oh geez, I should have moved it over here. And if you're drilling holes, then you have to drill more holes, tap more threads. This way it'll slide around and do what we want it to very easily. So that's the solution for the controller boxes. Next, when we come back, we're actually going to be mounting these controller boxes into the chassis, because we have to mount these first before we can actually mount our actuators because of running the cables. So we'll get to that next. Alright, so we've got the controller box in the bottom of the chassis, and of course the assembly on the bottom of it. I've got these corner brackets are kind of loose. I've actually got 2 of them installed already over here, and I'm going to go ahead and get the other ones lined up from the other side. And to do that, I'm going to have to lean over and see where my holes are at. Get a general idea where they need to be. It's kind of easy if you line up the holes with the channels in the 10 series here. Chances are we're going to get what we need. I just had to lift up on it a little bit there to get this one started. Alright, so we've got one more to do over here. Get that one in the right spot. Alright, we got them all started. So now all we have to do is get our 8 wrench. And I'm going to pull them to the side of the chassis first before I tighten the bottom ones, because the bottom ones will just pull everything up to it. Alright. So now I'll just go in and get these bottom guys, snug them up a little. It's a close call in here with these bolts, getting these wrenches in here, because they're different sizes, but it works. And that's all that matters. Alright, so now that baby's in there solid. And it's down low enough to where if I needed to, the seat's going to be sitting up here, the rails. So it's down low enough that if I need to put like a sheet in here, if I wanted to cover that up so you can't see it with something else later on, then I'll have room to do that. So here's a picture actually showing you the edges that are hanging down below the chassis here. And you can see that because of the feet that are next to it, that I'll have no interference problems when I set this chassis back on the ground. Of course, the feet aren't going to be touching the ground anyway because the actuators will be. So what we'll do next is go ahead and get the other box installed up front and come back and take a look at it. So now we're looking at the final configuration of the controller boxes. And of course this is movable, so I might tweak that a little bit as the build continues. And what we're going to do now is put the actuators on the frame. And I'm going to put 2 actuators all the way at the back corners of the frame, but I'm not going to go all the way out here to the front of the frame. I'm going to put them back here towards where the wheel motor mount uprights are. And this will give me a shorter rectangular side than if I put them all the way at the front. At the front, I'm worried that there won't be quite as much perceivable motion because it's such a longer plane that I'm moving. It might give me a little bit better sensation down here. And if it doesn't, of course, I can just slide these actuators, as you saw the brackets I'm using, back and forth and just test and try to dial it into what I feel like gives me the best experience. So we'll get to mounting these actuators next. Right, so now we're ready to mount our actuators. Moving right along. And we'll be using these U-brackets that you may have seen before if you've been watching this video. And you can see I've got my special custom 4-hole pattern drilled in to these brackets so they will fit this profile. And I have that little shim material in there that's very slick on this side so that I can slide these actuators back and forth on the front and back to fine-tune the feel of the system. And really there's not much else to see here as far as the brackets, so we'll go ahead and just slide this puppy in. And I'm going to put it in these middle 2 because I've actually kind of looked at this before, and that's where I want these actuators to be resting. They'll be in the middle 2 grooves here and the middle 2 holes in the bracket here. So without further ado, let's get this done. This should go in pretty easy, right? So I'm going to spin these around the other way. I want the shorter end of the T-nut pointing out to the profile. So it's got more room here that doesn't have T-nut sticking out. Right, so I'm just going to kind of move this in so I got a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch or so of reveal on the back of the frame, because I'm going to keep this as farther back as possible. And then of course it's just a matter of tightening everything up. A little cross pattern on this. And I'm just not tightening it real tight just a second because I want to make sure, and look straight down on it, that I am not cocked one way or the other. That looks pretty good right there. You want this to be perpendicular as possible to this frame piece here so that the actuator is straight up and down when it's sitting down. You don't want it sitting in a weird angle, even though it does have this rolled off foot on it to allow it to compensate. I'd just like to have everything nice and straight. That looks good, so we'll go ahead and tighten this down to clamping pressures. See how it feels once we're done. See, it's trying to roll away from me. Alright, that's good. Really, that feels good, just tighten it down. Sometimes when you tighten a fastener down, you just know, it just feels good going in and you know it's going to be a good, nice, solid attachment. And boy, that is. That is nice and tight. Yeah, I like that. That's the way it ought to be. So now what we got to do is put our actuator in. Now before I do that, I just want to show you this real quick. Now the kit includes these 11mm bolts. I believe they're 6 mils, but they're 11mm on the top. Oh, actually they're not. They're actually 1/4 inch by 20 pitch thread on these. Anyway, they only come with these lock washers. As lock washers, you can see there, it kind of sticks up and it's got sharp edges on it. And I really don't want to put this against the metal bracket. It's going to gouge it up as you tighten down. It'll spin a little bit. So I'm going to put a washer on it. And it's a shame they didn't add washers to this kit. I'm just wondering why they didn't. But anyway, I just don't like marring up the finish on things if at all possible. Plus, the washer is going to make it a little easier for this bolt to turn once that lock nut engages. Right, so I'm going to put this in with the cable. First of all, I'm going to check the box over here, make sure I got the right guy, and that's the left rear, which is the right one. And then I'm just going to kind of eyeball as I put this in here to these middle holes in the bracket and get these guys started. Gotta find the hole. There it is. There we go. There's one side. Let's get the other side started. And I kind of pick up on this as I'm putting these bolts in. It makes it a lot easier so they're not resting against the sides of the brackets holes here. Makes things a lot easier to put the bolt in. Of course, I'll just finger tight now. I'll take a look at the orientation real quick just to make sure I'm still looking perpendicular on the frame when I look down on it. And it looks like it's pretty good to me. Okay. Yes, it looks very good. So now it's just a matter of tightening it up. Get the right ratchet direction here. Snug that up. Let's go to the other side and get one. Alright, now I'll get the final little snug up on it. Don't want to tighten it up too much. You could probably actually snap these little bolts without too much problem. And that would be bad. Alright. Alright, that's very, very tight, very stiff, very nice. I really like things that tighten up like they're supposed to. This is rock solid. I like that. And if I look down here, I can see that this foot bottom here is just a little bit lower than the foot that's on the actual frame, which is where I want it, because if I ever take this actuator off, that way I can just lift up one corner and then take the actuator off and set it back down on the foot, and there won't be a big, huge difference in the height of the corner while maybe I have to maintain one of these or something. It's just looking into the future a little bit because I've been there and done that so many times. Now, we're also going to be managing the cable here, and you can see very nice cable here. It actually bends pretty easily, and I'm just going to run this like this and run it down, and I'll show you how I'm going to do my cable management with these special fasteners you can get from 80/20 that really work great. And yeah, so that's it. All we got to do now is get all the other actuators installed, and I'm going to put one up here just in front of the upright for the motor mount piece here. And the reason I'm doing that, as I said before, is I don't want to put one all the way down at the end, because that'll give me it's going to be a very long distance between the actuators and a very short distance between the width of the actuators. So I'm trying to make the rectangular box that we make with these actuators as square as possible, and that's about as square as I'm going to be able to get it. I wouldn't be putting it here, obviously, on this side of this, but then it would be really tilty, heavy on the front. So I'm going to put it up here just ahead of the steering column. So we'll get the rest of them mounted, and then we'll take a look at the cables we got to put on this to make everything work. Right, so we've got the actuators mounted on the front up here, and we'll just walk around, and we also have them situated on the back. I actually turned them around so the cables were going the other way because I saw that they were not going to interfere with my speakers once I have them where I want them to be. And as you can see, there's a lot of cables hanging out and power cables hooked up because I wanted to test this. And here's a short clip of the test that these things go through. It's going to self-test when you go open the application up. It's got a function for that. And as you can see, they're moving together and then separately. So everything looks good, and I wanted to make sure everything was working, obviously, before I started managing all this cable. And you can see there are a few cables coming out. I had to run a different electrical cable for the rear controller box because the cable, as I had previously mentioned, didn't look long enough, and it certainly wasn't. But the other cable for the front controller will be fine. So all we got to do now is get on with our cable management, and I'm going to show you guys this cool little clip that you can get from 80/20 that is able to accept zip ties and really can do anything you want to with them, and they're easy to move around and reuse. So they're pretty cool, and that's what I'll be using for this cable management job. So I wanted to show you guys these clips I'm using for cable management. You can see it has a T on the bottom of it, and that goes into the channel. Then we have some slots in both sides of this clip so that whatever orientation you need to run your zip ties, you're able to do that. Of course, they just fit right in the channel, and you twist it in, but it's really hard to twist these in. But if you have a 22mm wrench, it fits this clip perfectly. So all you got to do is slip it over it and twist it into position. That easy. Makes it a lot easier. And then once it's in position, of course, we just take your zip tie and put it in whatever pair of slots that you need for your cabling situation. Easy to reverse it and take it back out. Just snip off your zip tie, and again, I'm using that 22mm wrench to twist it out and just put it in another position very quickly. That's what I really like about these things. And there you go. Very solid connection. Now, when we actually look at the wiring here, or my cable management of the wiring, you'll be able to see more than a few of these clips that I use. And they're just really great to use because you can really fine tune where you want them without having to undo some sticky stuff or undo screws or anything like that. Very cool. And you see the cable management here. This is the initial session of cable management. It includes some speaker wires too. That's not all wires concerned with D-Box. And I try to run it down the sides and come out each side out the front so it'll reach the computer. Make sure that the loops going under this cross member are clear and tight so that they're not dragging on the ground once I set this on the ground. And I just use a little wire tie for keeping that white wire up. I might put a zip on that later. But yeah, that's pretty much it for now as far as the wiring. Everything's bundled up on the front, as you can see, and we're ready to set this puppy down in its little aluminum cups and attach everything and go driving. So we'll get to that next. Alright, so now we're actually going to check out the software that comes with your D-Box system. And it's called D-Box Game Center. Of course, I've already installed it. Just open it up. And the first screen you get here is the motion code. And that's a whole list of games that are supported by D-Box. And of course, it's going to tell you if you have the code installed for the particular game you're looking for. But there is a lot of games in here. I know they had a long list because I read it on their website before I actually got this D-Box system, but it just looks like they have more in here than it was on the list originally. But it's got flight sims, it's got from 2010 to 2017, all the F1 games, Falcon 4, Flight Simulator X, they even have Digital Combat Simulator, one of my favorite flight sims. And I think they've also got, yeah, they've got IL-2, Cliffs Over Dover, Kart Racing Pro, European Truck Simulator. It's got everything on here, it seems like. Richard Burns Rally. This is really cool. I didn't know they supported this many games. So, well, I've only got 2 games installed right here on this computer for now. I've got R-Factor 2, just haven't installed it on this new build yet. So let's go take a look at what you do to install. First of all, I'm clicking on iRacing, and if you look down here on the bottom, it says reinstall, because a little thing pops up, install motion code. Well, I don't need to reinstall it because it's already there, but if I clicked right underneath it, this ACTC, you'll see the install button comes up. And if you click on that, of course I don't have that game on here, so it's going to error out somewhere. It says downloading it, so it actually downloads, and this little box pops up. And not only does this little box pop up, I have to drag this little help menu that pops up also. Get that over in the corner here so you guys can see it. And it's just a little helper menu here that you can scroll down, and it just kind of walks you through what you should be doing and what you should be seeing as you're doing these things. So it's pretty cool that they actually got this help menu that pops up when you hit install. Now, of course, installing is kind of not installing here because I haven't said next over here yet, but it's going to error out as soon as I agree to everything here. See, once it got to this, select the installation folder. I would have to tell it where the installation folder is for it to install, because you can see install is grayed out now. So it won't install it, so I just cancel out of it. Yes, I want to quit. And everything quits. It's up this little menu over here, but we just get rid of it by clicking on it. So that's how the installation works. It's really easy. It just goes out on the internet and goes to D-Box website and retrieves the latest motion code for whatever game that you have. And it will update them automatically every time you start the game center, if you have that checked, and we do. Now, I'm going to go over here, before I drill down to the really fine-tooth type of settings, or at least as fine as it gets with this software, we're going to go over global settings. And game center settings automatically check your game list for updates. I have that checked because every time it starts, it'll check, and if there's something new, it'll go grab it and download it for me. Now we'll go over here to the control panel. And I have to go down to my triple monitor screen, drag that back up. There it is. And you can see it has Motion Players tab, and that's really the only tab it has. Got defaults and digital audio interface, D-Box Kind Audio. So you would click on that, and here you could go in and set some major or the most general configurations for your system. And I have the only thing I changed on this was I made the motion and vibration balance percent down to 0, and that means that the vibration is 0. If you go, here's how it works. If you go to the left, it takes the vibration away and increases the motion. And it says it right there. Negative values emphasize motion over vibrations. High frequencies or positive values emphasize vibrations over motion. The optimal value is 0%. Well, I don't want any vibrations on mine. You actually still get vibrations, even if you have this turned all the way down. So I just turn all the way down because I want my actuators to be working on the motion cues more than anything else, and that's about the best you can do to get that done. Now, once that's done, or even before that's done, we have some buttons down here. And here you can actually hit a test button. And I'm going to have videos showing what happens when we actually click the test button. So we're going to click the test button and let it go through its test, and you can see what happens. First thing it does is it lifts off the rig and starts going through the motions it can do. And these are pretty mild motions. And then it goes into a vibration test loop, which is just the vibrators vibrating. You might be able to hear it a little bit, but I've got it turned all the way down. It's still vibrating pretty good. Then it goes to another motion loop that moves it a lot more. You can see how that did. Then it'll go through another vibration loop. And that's 4 of the different loops there, and then it'll actually go back to the original loop after the vibration loop is done. And go up and down, back and forth, gently. Right. So you can keep doing that and have a great time. So we'll stop the test and get back up to the screen here. Now, once all this is done, of course, you just hit apply and you're good to go. I haven't done anything different here, so I'm just going to say cancel to get out of this one. Now we're going to go back to our motion code tab. And because I have a set of course and iRacing set up here, I'll just go to iRacing, and now we'll go down here to the right hand lower center of the screen and go to settings. Now this pulls up another window that I'm going to have to drag back up here for you. And this is called the motion code settings. And we get a default screen here, main level percent. Well, I want 100% there for sure. And you can see here, motion vibration is again at 0%, which means it's going to emphasize the vibration and motion equally. So I'm going to drag that back down to 0 again. And then I'm going to say save all. Now I also have a profile here, only at 1 because I just got this and just started messing with it. Enable automatic start with game is checked so that when the game pops up, the cockpit or either the motion system will engage automatically, which is what I want it to do. Now, we can go over to this motion profile editor, and this is where we have some drilled down or a little bit more finite adjustments for our settings. We got a general motion, which is front right intensity power, left right intensity or power, and up and down intensity. And we also have inverted yaw or YSS. Of course, we don't need to invert our yaw because everything's working like it should. And I haven't really played with this yet, but I will later on. This is pretty much all default settings that came with iRacing profile when I downloaded the code for it. Engine vibration is at 40, skid vibration 40, suspension, surface texture is at 43. I was playing with this, trying to get a little more texture feeling, or not really a little more, just seeing how it would do and how it would go. So again, you can actually play with these settings, which is very cool while you're sitting in the car and running the game. So if I'm on the track, I can stop on the track, change these settings any way I want to, hit save all, and then start driving again and see what those settings did. And that's a great way to fine-tune your settings pretty quickly. And then you just save your profile to that and under save all, and then whenever I want this profile, I'll just come in and select it and say, okay, that's the one we want for this track in this car. And I was afraid that I was going to have to keep going in and out or alt-tabbing to be able to do this, and I'm really happy that we can be in the car and running and still make these changes on the fly and experience what those changes are actually doing. So that's really about it. It's not that complicated. I've been using a much more complicated piece of software for years, and it's kind of a welcome change in some ways because there's not a whole lot to do, and really the changes you can tell right away when you change some of these effects. I've already been running it, obviously. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and get in iRacing, get on Sebring in the Ford GT3, and start driving around a little bit and making some changes and see if we can. I know I'm going to feel the changes more than you'll be able to see them on the video, so I'll just try to describe them to you best I can. But we'll just drive around a little bit and make some changes and go some extreme changes and see how that works. Hope it doesn't buck me out of the seat, but we'll see how that goes when we get to the driving section. All right, so here we are at Sebring, one of my favorite tracks for testing things. And we are in the Ford GT3, and you can see up here on my fourth monitor is where I'm going to have the motion profile editor open so I can play with things as I drive around. So let's just go ahead and get this thing on the street or the track. And I got the sound turned down way low. So that you can hear me talking. First thing you notice about this compared to a seat mover type chassis is, well, it just feels completely different. There's no comparison as far as the type of feelings you're getting. This feels like you're actually sitting in a car with a sprung suspension chassis. At first it was a little bit disconcerting to me because I've been in a seat mover for so long. It felt almost kind of, I don't know, loose, or I don't know, it just didn't feel like what I normally experienced. But after driving it a little bit, it's all coming together. It just feels like a natural experience now. When you get out of this and go get in a car, then you'll know what I'm talking about. It's just kind of an instant translation of the kind of cues and feeling you get from the track. And for some reason, I don't miss traction control. Just, if I get too loose, I can feel it from the actuators. And if you'll notice something about these actuators, you can still hear the car because they're almost silent. You can just barely hear them moving, which is another plus. Even though, again, sound is no big deal for me because I'm in the sim racing garage and I can make as much noise in a simulator that I want to, and it doesn't bother anybody. However, if you're in your house or in, like in a spare bedroom or in a closet somewhere running your rig, it's going to be important not to bother other people. And this is really quiet. I'm a little shocked at how quiet this is, but you can see as I'm going around that turn 17 how much action I was getting on the suspension. This bumpy straightaway here, it's a completely different experience. It's pretty amazing, and I kind of like what I'm feeling. I don't know what kind of changes I would really want to do to the setup I have, so I'm going to keep an eye on not changing it too much as we do this. And it's got a lot of different changes we can make, obviously. So let's go ahead and stop the car. And it feels like my rear end broke loose right there, and I'm not sure how D-Box is setting that up or how their algorithms and their software are doing that, but it feels like I've actually broken loose in the back. So I'm really not missing the traction loss like I thought I would. Anyway, let's go up to the motion profiler, and what I'm going to do here is something that maybe you guys can see. I'm going to go for up-down intensity power. I'm going to take that up to, let's see, 3, 4, 5. Now it says that the intensity, just by raising it 6 points, doubles the amount of power that you have. So I just lifted it up 3 more, and we'll see how that does before we go any further. And leave it at 4, 6. So let's get back and run again. Oops, forgot to save all. Got to save all, or these settings won't take effect. There we go. So now we'll go and see what the heave is doing now. And that's going to be as far as bouncing up and down. All right, here we go. All right. Yeah, just notice right there, there's definitely some more bounce to this thing now. Wow. It doesn't take much to really feel the change. We'll go with some curbing. Well, it's a bit much too. I thought it might be. So what we're going to do now is I'm just going to go over a couple more curves here. Naturally, I wouldn't be doing this if I was actually trying to run fast. But I'm just going to crank this heave up and see what happens. What the heck, you know? Let's go on up to, I don't want to go just crazy ludicrous power, but I'm just take it up to 60. See how that does. All right. All right, 60 it is. See how we do. Oh, it doesn't eject me out of the seat here. Oh yeah, I can feel it. It's just really springy now. Yeah, it's really springy on the heave now. So what I really want to do is test it in turn 17 where you've got all these little ripple bumps in the turn and see what that does. Now, I don't know if you can see much of a difference from the angles of the cameras, but yeah, that's way too much heave. I was feeling like I was going airborne over those bumps. Yeah, it's really bouncing up and down along the straight, so that's way too much. All right, so really what I'm doing is trying to give you an idea of the example, or an example rather, of what you can do and the effects it does, but I just don't know how well this is translating to video. Yeah, I'm putting that back down to 43 where it was before because I kind of liked it there. And that was the overall up and down intensity. Now what I'm going to do is go to suspension. It's sitting at 40, and I'm going to double that to 46. That should double how much I get according to what the instructions say. So now I should have more suspension bump feeling in the chassis. So, whoops, I always forget to save all. I don't know why I forget that. There we go. That should do it. Okay. All right, so that was suspension. So let's see what that does. Give me more bounce or something maybe, I don't know. I mean, I just love the way this chassis dives under braking. Very cool feeling. Just awesome. Let's go off track here a little bit. Yeah, that feels pretty good. A little excessive, I think. All right. Yeah, it definitely increases the suspension feel that I'm getting, and it is too much. It's exaggerated. Actually, the default iRacing profile that they had on here was pretty much right where I felt like it should be. So I'm gonna stop that right now. But boy, I just love the way this thing. You can see how the dive is on this. It's just so cool. We're under braking, and I'm gonna get a harness attached to this, and it's obviously gonna feel even better. So we'll put that back down to 40. Leave that alone. The surface texture feels good. Save it. And front and rear intensity power, that would be takeoff and the diving of the brakes, but it's really good right now. So what I'm going to do is just do a couple more laps here. I'm going to turn the sound up a little bit, enjoy it. I won't be talking, and just feel what it feels like. And let you guys watch it from the different angles that I have the cameras at. All right, so here we go. Oh, this is so cool. You can really feel this thing slide right away. It's really feels intuitive, and it's not hard to catch the slides. Whoa. Oh gosh, so much fun. Wow. Final thoughts on the D-Box 4400 motion system. Adding motion to a sim racing experience is something that can be accomplished, well, in many different ways and at many different price points. Now, I've been using a seat mover design with traction loss on it for, well, years now, and it served me well during that time. But like most guys, I've always been looking at other ways to experience motion in my sim driving. And ever since I had an opportunity to try a D-Box solution a couple of years ago, I always wanted to have one of my own to drive. And now I have finally managed to make that happen. Now, it was not an easy thing for me to do. It's hard to justify spending the kind of money it took to secure this system. Which brings me to the most obvious and, well, glaring con for this D-Box 4400i Gen 2 system. That's a mouthful. It's a very expensive motion solution. At a retail cost of $17,000, it can be quite a shock to the finances of a sim racer. And there are other less expensive ways to get some D-Box goodness mounted to your rig, like the 4250i, and that's $13,000 instead of the 4400i that I have. Or you could source a used or refurbished D-Box setup. I've seen guys using the SRG 230 theater seat movers on sim racing rigs. Even then, most would not even consider spending that much money on their sim racing hobby. And that's probably the reason why we don't see many of these systems in people's homes. On the other hand, there are seat mover solutions out there that cost significantly more than D-Box does, although these units are usually marketed as a turnkey solution. Still, it seems no matter what motion system you prefer, there are always ways to spend a lot of money on them. Well, enough about the cost of the D-Box 4400i. Let's get to the good stuff. Now, the most obvious difference for me between my previous seat mover solution and the D-Box setup is now I actually feel as though I'm driving a properly sprung suspended chassis. The best way probably for me to describe it would be a sensation of sitting above the road surface as you're driving the car instead of sitting on top of the road surface. It has a more analog or natural feel to how the car reacts to bumps and dips in the road surface and the lateral forces applied when you're cornering. I believe this is because of the heave component that the D-box system can deliver. And the same feeling goes for the braking action of the setup. Just feels like a more intuitive and natural action with the entire chassis pitching forward instead of just your seat pitching forward. The sensation of having more control of your braking, if you will. Although my braking consistency has remained pretty much the same. The most common feeling cue between a seat mover and the D-box to me is the roll component. But still, with the whole chassis moving with the roll, I'd have to give the nod to the D-box on that too. When looking at the D-box solution system, the only thing I feared I would be missing was the traction loss component of my Stage 4 cockpit. Now, I don't think anything will replace the feeling of a chassis that's sitting there and will pivot sideways when a slide occurs. But I'm pleasantly surprised how, well, I really don't miss it. D-box has done a very good job of programming this system to replicate the cues of your car's rear end breaking loose. It's just not rather exaggerated as a Stage 4 is. It's really more of a testament of how well D-box has programmed their systems and the way the whole system delivers motion. Everything just seems to come together for a noticeably more immersive driving experience, at least in my opinion. And there are those who will disagree with this assessment and will bring out the whiteboards and run calculations on how one system delivers motion cues better than another. But all that pretty much goes out the window when you throw in an analog human being into those equations. It's really hard to nail down a constant when all of us feel things differently from each other. Which brings me to the conclusion that really there is no one motion system that is best for everyone. The only way to find out what is your preferred motion system is, well, to get in it and drive it. As for me, well, I'm quite happy with my new D-box system. It puts a smile on my face when I'm out pushing hard on the track. Although I'm not too happy about the cost of acquiring this new happiness. But that pain will fade as I spend more hours motoring away in this D-box chassis. If you have the means to buy a D-box system without having to get a second mortgage, then I don't think you will ever regret it. I'm Barry Rowland, and thanks again for watching the Sim Racing Garage channel.